In July 2003, deep in the war-scarred city of Mosul, a quiet house hid two of the most feared men in Iraq. Uday and Qusay Hussein, sons of Saddam, had vanished after Baghdad fell, but the hunt never stopped. When U.S. forces finally found them, they didn't surrender. For 6 brutal hours, gunfire and rockets ripped the house apart. By sunset, the villa was in ruins, and inside the rubble, the bloodline of Saddam Hussein lay dead. On March 20th, 2003, the United States invaded Iraq. The goal was to remove Saddam Hussein from power. Within weeks, U.S. troops had taken control of Baghdad. The Iraqi government collapsed. Saddam disappeared, and so did his 2 sons, Uday and Qusay Hussein. Uday Hussein was born on June 18, 1964. He was Saddam's oldest son and was expected to take over one day. But his violent behavior made even Saddam nervous. In 1988, he beat a man to death with a club at a party. That man was Saddam's personal valet. After that, Saddam distanced himself from Uday. Still, Uday had a lot of power. He controlled the Iraqi Olympic Committee and the media. He lived in luxury and terrorized the people around him. He was accused of raping women, torturing athletes, and killing anyone who made him angry. Qusay Hussein was born in 1966. He didn't seek attention like his brother, but he had more real power. He ran Iraq's intelligence services, secret police, and military operations. He was in charge of the elite Republican Guard and the Special Security Organization. During the 1991 uprisings after the Gulf War, Qusay led the crackdown. Thousands of Iraqis were killed during those operations. By the time of the U.S. invasion in 2003, Qusay was considered Saddam's likely successor. By April 2003, just weeks after the fall of Baghdad, the U.S. was desperate to capture the people who helped Saddam rule with fear. To make it easier for troops to recognize them, the military came up with a strange idea: a deck of playing cards. Each card showed the face of someone in Saddam's inner circle. The higher the rank, the more important the card. Saddam himself was the ace of spades. Uday, the older son, was the ace of hearts. Qusay, the quieter but more dangerous one, was the ace of clubs. The U.S. government put a massive bounty on the sons' heads. $15 million for Uday and $15 million for Qusay. $30 million in total, making it one of the biggest cash rewards ever offered for anyone in history. Flyers were dropped. Their faces were plastered all over the country. Iraqi citizens were told they would become rich beyond imagination if they gave them up. But despite the huge reward and thousands of American boots on the ground, the brothers were nowhere to be found. American soldiers raided homes, searched mosques, and questioned dozens of people. They swept through Tikrit, Baghdad, and other cities where Saddam loyalists might hide. Still, there was no sign of them. It was like they had disappeared from the face of the earth. Some thought they had fled to Syria or were hiding with tribal leaders. Others believed they were living underground, moving from house to house. But they headed north to Mosul, Iraq's second-largest city, near the border with Syria. It was a smart choice. Mosul had been a stronghold for the Ba'ath Party for years, and many people there still supported Saddam's regime. The city was packed with loyalists who hated the U.S. invasion and were willing to help hide members of Saddam's family. It was the kind of place where people kept secrets, and the perfect hiding spot. At first, Uday and Qusay stayed in different safe houses, moving from place to place to avoid being tracked. Only trusted contacts knew where they were. These were people who had worked with the regime or had personal ties to the family. They knew how dangerous it was to help the brothers, but their loyalty, or fear, kept them quiet. Eventually, the 2 brothers settled in the home of a man named Nawaf al-Zaidan. He had once been a businessman with connections to Saddam's inner circle. He wasn't a stranger to the Hussein family. They had done deals together in the past, so there was trust between them. Nawaf's house was located in the Al-Falah neighborhood, a middle-class area of Mosul. It wasn't flashy, but it wasn't small either. The villa was large, with 3 floors, thick outer walls, and heavy metal doors. It blended in with the rest of the homes in the area, nothing that would raise suspicion from the outside. But inside, it was now a shelter for Iraq's most wanted fugitives. Qusay had also brought someone else with him. his 14-year-old son Mustafa. The boy was young, quiet, and always close to his father. Wherever Qusay went, Mustafa followed. No one knows for sure why he brought him along. Maybe it was for protection, or maybe he simply couldn't leave him behind. But bringing a child into hiding added more risk. It was no longer just about survival. It was about keeping his family safe too. By mid-July 2003, the pressure was building. U.S. forces were still hunting for Saddam and his sons, and the reward money was becoming harder to ignore. Nawaf al-Zaidan started to have second thoughts. Maybe he feared getting caught. Maybe he no longer believed they could escape. Or maybe the cash was just too tempting. Whatever his reason, Nawaf made a decision that would change everything. On July 21, 2003, he contacted American forces through an intermediary. He told them that Uday and Qusay Hussein were hiding in his villa in Mosul. He didn't leave any room for doubt. He gave the exact location, described the house, and confirmed they were still inside. He also made it clear that he wanted protection for himself and his family, and the full reward. The Americans were skeptical at first. They had received dozens of false tips in the past, and most had led nowhere. But this one felt different. The source seemed confident, the details lined up, and Nawaf had been known to have ties to the regime, which made it more believable. A small U.S. team was quickly sent to Mosul to verify the claim. They checked the neighborhood, watched the house from a distance, and gathered intelligence. By the end of the day, they were almost certain that the sons were inside. Once the confirmation came through, the U.S. command didn't waste a second. They began preparing for a full military operation. This wasn't going to be a quiet arrest. The Americans had to assume they were heavily armed and ready to die fighting. The plan was to move in fast, surround the house, and demand a surrender. If the brothers gave up, they'd be taken alive. If not, the troops were fully prepared to bring the entire house down. On the morning of July 22, 2003, the quiet streets of the Al-Falah neighborhood were about to turn into a battlefield. At around 10 a.m., American forces moved into position around the villa. It was a carefully planned mission involving some of the most elite units in the U.S. military. The team was made up of Delta Force commandos from Task Force 20, a special operations group created to hunt down top members of Saddam's regime. They were supported by soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division, known for their speed and precision. Outside the house, the Americans had armored Humvees and Bradley fighting vehicles. Overhead, helicopters hovered in the sky, ready to provide backup. Snipers took positions on nearby rooftops. The entire area was sealed off. No one could get in or out. Civilians were quickly cleared from the streets to keep them out of harm's way. The soldiers used loudspeakers and called out in Arabic, telling the people inside to come out with their hands up. They promised safe treatment if they surrendered. It was standard approach, meant to give the suspects a chance to live. But there was no response. Seconds later, gunfire exploded from inside the villa. The bullets ripped through the windows and walls. The Americans immediately returned fire, diving for cover and trying to assess the threat. It was clear that Uday and Qusay had no intention of giving up. Inside the villa, the brothers had set up a strong defense. They were on the upper floors, using the height to their advantage. They had assault rifles, grenades, and plenty of ammunition. Qusay's son Mustafa was also with them. Reports later showed that the boy had a weapon too. The Americans now knew this would be no quick arrest. It had turned into a full-blown firefight. The Americans used everything they had. They fired back with M249 machine guns, grenade launchers, and AT-4 rocket launchers. Smoke began to fill the area as broken glass and chunks of concrete flew through the air. They tried to rush the building with small assault teams, hoping to get inside and end the fight quickly. But the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. Each time a team approached the front door or the side of the building, they were hit by a wall of gunfire. After nearly an hour of intense fighting, it became clear to the American commanders that they needed more firepower. The brothers weren't surrendering. Task Force 20 requested immediate air support and heavier weapons. Soon the sound of helicopter blades thundered above the house. Apache attack helicopters from the 101st Airborne arrived and circled the villa. One of the Apaches locked onto the second floor with a Hellfire missile. Moments later, it launched. The missile slammed into the upper floor of the house, and a massive explosion lit up the sky. Part of the second story collapsed, but even after that blast, the shooting didn't stop. The gunmen inside kept firing, refusing to quit. It was clear they were moving through the house, going from one room to another, using furniture as cover, and using whatever weapons they had left. They were skilled in urban fighting, and they knew how to hold a defensive position. Another Hellfire missile was fired, this time aimed at the roof. The impact was devastating, but again, the house wasn't silent. As the battle dragged on, the risks to American troops grew. Several American soldiers were injured during the operation. Some were shot by gunmen firing from the windows and second floor. Others were wounded by flying shrapnel from grenades and exploding concrete as rockets and bullets smashed into the building. A few soldiers had to crawl out under gunfire while their teammates dragged the wounded to safety. Medics treated them on the spot as best they could, behind armored vehicles and under cover. Despite the chaos, the operation didn't stop. The wounded were evacuated, and more reinforcements were called in. The commanders knew this had to end soon, but it had to be done right. The battle stretched for over 6 hours, making it one of the longest single gunfights U.S. troops had faced since the invasion of Iraq began in March 2003. By around 4 p.m., the shooting finally stopped. No more gunfire came from inside, and by 5 p.m., the threat was finally neutralized, and American troops moved in. The scene was total destruction. The house was barely standing. The soldiers moved carefully, checking for traps or any signs of survivors. They had to make sure the threat was truly over. As they searched the wreckage, they found 4 bodies in the ruins of the second and third floors. 2 adult males, 1 teenage boy, and 1 other man who appeared to be a bodyguard. All of them had been killed in the fight. 1 adult male had a gunshot wound to the head, likely from the final moments of the battle. The teenage boy had been shot multiple times. The troops quickly took photographs of the bodies and sent them to intelligence officers. This was a high-level kill. They needed to be exactly sure who these men were. Military intelligence teams used dental records, scars, medical files, and x-rays to confirm the identities. Special agents also looked at facial features, bone structure, and past surgeries. Uday had a noticeable limp from a previous assassination attempt and metal rods in his leg. Qusay had different injuries recorded in his file. After careful comparison, the results came in. It was official. 2 of the adult men were Uday and Qusay Hussein. The teenage boy was confirmed to be Qusay's son, Mustafa. The 4th man was their bodyguard. On July 24, 2003, 2 days after the intense firefight, American military spokesmen held a press conference and shared the news with the world. To prove it beyond doubt, they released graphic photographs of the bodies. The decision to release those photographs was controversial. Some U.S. officials believed it was necessary to silence conspiracy theorists and to send a message to remaining loyalists of Saddam's regime. Others thought it was too graphic. But in Iraq, the effect was immediate. The reaction across the country was mixed and emotional. In some areas, especially in Baghdad and the south where anti-Saddam sentiment was strong, people cheered in the streets. Some fired rifles into the air in celebration. Others wept, not out of sorrow, but out of relief. To them, the deaths of Uday and Qusay felt like the true beginning of the end of Saddam's brutal regime. But not everyone celebrated. In parts of northern Iraq, especially areas with deep tribal or Ba'athist loyalty, people were shocked and angry. Some refused to believe the news. Rumors spread that the men in the photos were body doubles. Others said the Americans had faked everything. But as more photos and forensic evidence were shown, even the doubters began to accept it. Once the identification process was complete, U.S. forces flew the bodies to Baghdad. The Americans wanted to avoid turning their graves into shrines or rallying points for insurgents, so they kept the burial quiet. Later that week, the bodies were secretly transported to Tikrit. This was where the Hussein family cemetery was located. But instead of a public funeral, the burials were done with tight security and no ceremony. The graves were unmarked and hidden, and only a handful of people were present. Even fewer knew the exact location. While the public reacted and the burials were taking place, one man's life changed forever. Nawaf al-Zaidan. Just days after the raid, Nawaf was quietly paid the full $30 million. It made him one of the highest paid informants in modern history. For his safety, U.S. intelligence quickly arranged for him and his family to leave Iraq permanently. His name was never officially confirmed by the U.S. military, but it leaked later through Iraqi sources. Where he went after that is still unknown. Some say he relocated to Europe or the Gulf region, where he started a new life with a new identity. Others say he disappeared completely, never to be seen again. After the raid, the villa was nothing but rubble. The walls were blown apart, and black smoke stained the nearby buildings. Neighbors later said the battle shook their homes. Some of them were injured by flying debris, but no civilians were killed. The U.S. military said they tried hard to avoid hurting anyone else during the fight, but once the shooting started, they had no choice but to respond with force. The deaths of Uday and Qusay were a big win for the U.S. military. They showed that even the most powerful figures in Saddam's regime could be found and taken out. It also gave hope to the Iraqi people, who had lived in fear for decades. However, the war was far from over. Just a few months later, in December 2003, U.S. troops captured Saddam Hussein himself, hiding in a hole near Tikrit. That marked another huge moment in the war. Even after the deaths of Uday and Qusay, Iraq continued to face violence. A strong insurgency grew, and American troops were attacked regularly. But for many Iraqis, the fall of Saddam's sons meant the end of an era of horror.